welcome to another episode of the Preparedness Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. You can find us online at thepreparednesspodcast.com. My name is Rob Hannes, and I'm the host for the show. You can email me at rob@prepcast.info. And just a little sideline on the email. I've been having some issues getting email actually going to me. I mean, I get them, but sometimes they go to junk or spam, and I'm not finding them until days, sometimes weeks later. So if I haven't responded, either send it again or just patiently wait or try hit me through Twitter or Facebook or something. Let me know, and I'll take a look. Just a few announcements here. This is the first podcast after the Expo. The Expo was good. There were some new vendors there that were really good to see. Met a lot of great people. Had a really good time. Stayed there way longer than we expected to because we just kept meeting people and talking to people, and it was really pretty cool. The only thing that was probably a negative was that there wasn't a whole lot of people there, or I should say there wasn't as many people as I was expecting or hoping. And I think this was due to poor advertising. I don't watch TV or the news very much here, so maybe there was advertising there, but I didn't see any billboards. I didn't see any of those bus stop placards. I didn't see, the only way I knew of this was either through Backwoods Home Magazine or through the local meetup groups. So that probably was what it was, which is too bad because I think it was a good show, and I think a lot of people would have enjoyed going to it. I also want to mention that my EMP mini guide is available via Amazon Kindle. It's so far what I know to be, true to the best of my knowledge through the research and the testing that I've done. We covered a lot of this in the podcast, put a lot of it on the website. All that information plus more is in the book, and I chose Kindle format at least to start with because as I continue to do some more research and more testing and stuff, I can update the book. And it's my understanding that you should be able to download it again, or when I put an update through Amazon, they'll notify you that you can go ahead and download the update. So that's one of the reasons I went with Kindle, because I wanted to be able to get information out there and then be able to update it and have you be able to download that updated information without having to pay for it again. Also, just another quick reminder to go ahead and fill out the listener survey. You can find the link for that. It's a little banner on the website. It helps us get an understanding of how you listen to podcasts and what you think of them. Completely anonymous, but it helps us put out a better podcast. Also, while you're there, go ahead and sign up for the weekly tips. You'll see a little banner on the left-hand column that says newsletter, but that's really the weekly tips. I should probably change that. You can also, in the upper navigation, it says newsletter. You can sign up through it that way. So this is also the day after Hurricane Sandy has made landfall, and it turned out to be much bigger than anybody was expecting. I think we kind of didn't expect it because we think, it's getting fall, it's starting to cool off. But remember, hurricane season is June through November. So not only is this still within the normal season, but there's still actually a whole nother month to go. So it is possible to get more hurricanes. Hopefully we won't, but I think one of the important considerations we can get from this is to not drop your guard simply because you think it's over, or it seems like hurricane season is over when it really isn't. We can also say the same for things like early winter storms. Look at West Virginia right now. They got 28 inches of snow, and it's not even in November yet. So these are always things that preppers should be thinking. You should always be thinking, what if? Another thing we can learn from this hurricane is the synergistic effects. We had the energy and moisture from the hurricane merging with a winter storm coming down out of the north, and it, just again, for example, West Virginia just got clobbered with a ton of wet snow. So without even going too deeply into this disaster event, we've already, learned, or there are 3 lessons here. Don't become complacent, look out for synergistic effects, and don't assume something is over or a season hasn't begun yet simply because it's not quite time yet. This is kind of the prepper mindset that you should you should have. You should always be thinking, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if? Those what if scenarios should help you develop better preparedness plans and better reactions to events and scenarios. Now, whether you're actually affected by a disaster like the hurricane, or if you're just watching it on TV or hear from it from friends or family or whatever, take the opportunity to analyze what happened so you know what to expect, not necessarily just because it's a hurricane, but any sort of disaster. For example, right now, there are parts of New York and I think New Jersey that are going to be without power for 3 or 4 days. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how the criminal element reacts to this and what exactly they're going to do. From what I understand, they're already starting to use things like Twitter and texting and stuff to coordinate, looting and theft and whatever. So you need to pay attention, because then you can apply this to your situation if a disaster happens in your area, and you can say, okay, this is the kind of things that we can expect because we've already seen these things happen before. Now, this podcast is going to be about stages of a disaster and trigger events. But before I get into that, I wanted to mention one thing about the upcoming election. I know there's a lot of polarization on this, and I try to keep things as non-political as possible. However, I want to mention that it doesn't matter who gets elected to the presidency, because they cannot stop the coming economic collapse. The mechanisms that are in place aren't going to go away simply because we vote a new president in. And I want to make sure that you understand that it doesn't matter who's in office, the problems are still there. So don't think that if your guy gets in, that everything is fine, because we still have issues. We still have a lot of problems in the economy. Nothing actually will have been solved by simply voting a new president. And even if that president was to actually take the proper steps to fix this situation that we're in, it may be too late anyway. So you need to prepare yourself for the eventualities that we've been talking about on this podcast. I just wanted to mention that just in case it hasn't already been made clear that a new president does not solve any of these issues. The issues have been building up for a very long time, and no one administration is the problem, has been the problem, or can fix this problem. So I just want to make sure that we all keep that in mind. Now, before we get to the main topic of stages of a disaster and trigger points, I wanted to highlight our sponsor, BuyEmergencyFoods.com. And the hurricane is a good example of why you want to have food storage. Right now, nobody is out moving around. There's a lot of cleanup. A lot of people are stuck at home. A lot of people have been evacuated because of flooding or cranes that are going to fall on the building, or buildings falling apart themselves, or trees falling on houses and stuff. And, this is one of the types of food that you should have, which are ready-to-eat meals. Another thing you should consider is how the meals are packaged. You should have a wide variety of foods packaged in a wide variety of ways, because variety is what you need in your food storage program. The Buy Emergency Foods come in a plastic container, which makes them durable and rugged, and they actually would probably float, I would imagine, but I haven't tested it. However, the individual pouches themselves are sealed. Flooding, whether it's through a hurricane or rains or snow runoff or whatever it is a very common disaster. I remember when I was a victim of flood, and it wasn't a fun thing. Floodwaters get everywhere. It's filthy. It's dirty. But you know what? These pouches, you could clean them off in a bleach solution, and the food inside would still be good to eat. And to me, that is just one aspect of food storage that I look at when I try to decide of what I'm going to store. These pouches are very tough, and I wouldn't have any issues pulling them out, wiping them off, washing them in a bleach solution, drying them off, and then opening up and using the food. I have these pouches here. I'm looking at them. They're perfectly fine. And that's one of the considerations you need to make in your food storage plan. And of course, it doesn't have to be, hurricanes or floods. It could be any number of disasters that you're a victim of. Having the ability to make Food, easily, I think, is a huge advantage because you're going to be dealing with a lot of other things. So if you go to the Preparedness Podcast website and click on their banner, or go directly to buyemergencyfoods.com, you're going to be able to check out the food. I think you're going to like it, and let them know that you heard about them on the Preparedness Podcast. Okay, let's talk about the stages of a disaster. This was an email that was sent to me, and the question asked about specifically economic trigger points, but I thought it was a good enough of a topic to go ahead and make it an entire podcast. And basically, the question comes from Rob in Minnesota. Now, let's keep in mind that I am looking at this from the standpoint of an individual that's trying to be prepared, a prepper. One of the big issues that we have when we look at disasters and try to learn lessons from the past, or looking at the plans for cities and counties, is that these planners are looking at events from a top-down perspective. In other words, they're looking at things that can either do the most good for most of the population or are centered on protecting themselves, which is called continuity of government. This has always been one of my pet peeves with emergency management on the governmental level. They're essentially focused on how to keep the government operational, and if we can save a few people, that's fine too. With smaller governments like small counties or a town, I notice that it's not so bad, but the larger the government, it seems that the less concerned they are with the individual. Now, I don't mean to say that they're not concerned about people, but everything that they do, all the plans, are all based on macro solutions for large-scale problems. How do we provide power? How do we provide heat? How do we keep the roads clear? They're not looking at individual solutions for individual families or individual households, which is understandable because they're trying to run, a county or a city or a state. But what happens is that I think there's a disconnect there that, one, you can't really look at their plans and boil that down to the same type of things that you should do for your household. And two, this leads to some very short-sightedness on the part of the planners, at least in terms of how they can help educate individual people and households and families to become better prepared. Now, I'm not saying that the government shouldn't be there to help, because they should. That's part of the reason that we implement government. I'm just saying that if more effort was spent in educating people to be prepared, even on a minimal level, then they could focus on their efforts to help those people that really need the help in an emergency situation, and we would all gain from that. The first step on this that I want to cover are the 4 phases of emergency management. Back in August of 2012, I made a post entitled exactly that, the 4 phases of emergency management, and I'll have a link in the show notes. Now, the reason this is important because this is the emergency management cycle. It's an endless loop. Mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Recently, I've noticed that some places have added prevention as a 5th element. However, I think that should be part of mitigation. Now, to quickly go over what these are. Mitigation is preventing disasters or taking steps to lessen the impact of unavoidable disasters. Ideally, it happens before an emergency occurs. Sometimes, however, though, mitigation and preparedness don't occur until after a disaster, and repairs and recovery are in order. We see this a lot with governmental and corporate entities. They don't want to spend the time, they don't want to spend the money to make the costs that are needed to be prepared and to mitigate whatever the effects would be until it happens, and then they seem to spare no expense showing the public or their stockholders or their customers, whatever, that they're doing everything they can to rectify the situation. I've seen this time and time again, and I've actually had some conversations with corporate and people, and they don't understand this. It's all about money. If it costs money, they don't want to do it until something happens, and then suddenly, they spare no expense. Now, the key points about mitigation is that it's supposed to take place before the emergency occurs, and its main focus is to prevent emergencies from happening. See, again, there's that prevention, or it minimizes their effects for anything that's unavoidable. Preparedness is the next stage in this loop, and as we know, preparedness is making plans and having the needed equipment and supplies to save lives during or after a disaster event. This also takes place before an emergency occurs, and it provides the gear and supplies that help you get through the event. Next on the loop is response. This is the immediate action taken upon the occurrence of a disaster or emergency. And by taking this action, you're attempting to protect yourself or others from harm or further harm. The key point of this is that it takes place during the reaction. A lot of times you could call this your immediate reaction or your immediate response to an event. The last on the cycle is recovery, and it includes everything that you would do to keep yourself safe and return your life to normal. This takes place after the emergency is over, and it's a good time to review what happened, what you did, what you could do better, what you could need for next time to make sure that, recovery, the reason it's a loop is because recovery goes right into mitigation. You use the recovery time to find out and learn so that you can take better steps in mitigation to prevent these impacts from happening again. Now, I covered this because these are four distinct phases that emergency managers look at and planners look at when they're trying to deal with disasters of all types and planning and stuff. And you can very well take this same information and use it in your emergency plan because you're going to go through these exact same steps. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is stages of a disaster. And I want to point out that this is how I personally look at it in terms of being a prepper. And I make that distinction because it's distinctly different from what a city or county or state emergency planner would look at it. At least as far as what my experience has shown me. The first stage is long-term analysis. This is looking at possible scenarios and what-if situations. This is where you make your threat analysis. This is where you watch movies and specials on TV and talk to friends and look at the news and extrapolate information that of events that's happening around you, and you say, what if that happened here? For example, the hurricane. People that are in Florida and the Gulf Coast and the southern eastern seaboard should be taking a look at this hurricane that happened and say, wow, hurricane just before Halloween. You know what? I never really considered it could happen that late. I should probably, see what I can do to update my plans or stay better aware of those situations. That's the type of long-term analysis I'm talking about. Things like we've talked about in this podcast about potential of EMP or a CME attack or hyperinflation or a currency devaluation or any number of the other disasters that we've talked about. This is kind of what makes us a prepper is we look at what's possible and go, you know what? I wouldn't be very comfortable. I wouldn't want to put my family through that. So I think I'm going to prepare for something if that happens. The next stage is forecast. This is where there is an actual notice of a pending disaster. This is when you should kick your plan into a high state of readiness. So the forecast or the prediction of an event is where you should start placing your trigger points. So, for example, using Hurricane Sandy as the example, I think it was like 3 or 4 days ago, they started forecasting that this could hit the Mid-Atlantic region. That should be a trigger or a warning or a red flag, whatever you want to call it, to you to go, aha, now I need to do something. I need to take specific action. Stage 3, I call emergence. This is where emergency comes from. This is the point where even the most stubborn or ignorant can't deny that it's going to happen. And incidentally, this is the point where most people, the average person, decides to take action. Again, we saw this in Hurricane Sandy. The day before the hurricane is to hit, we have New Yorkers standing in line, 100, 200 people deep waiting to get groceries so, they could be prepared for the big storm. That's not the time to be prepared. You want to stay ahead of the curve. So this is not where you want to put your trigger point. This is where you want to start hunkering down or maybe doing some last minute things, around your house or close to. You don't want to be stuck out in the public with everybody else. Stage 4 is the impact of this is, the disaster event itself. Now, sometimes, say like an earthquake, you're not going to have the forecast. You're just going to have, bam, it's just going to hit. And you don't necessarily get a trigger point or a warning, so to speak. But you should still have in your plan a set of emergency actions that you should take as soon as a disaster happens. At this point, you should pretty much do whatever you have to do to stay safe and alive. Stage 5 is going to be the immediate aftermath. This is the period immediately following the event, and as soon as the event's over. And so, like, again, a hurricane, sometimes you are going to be in the eye, and that's a calm, so to speak, but the event's not over because you still have another half of the hurricane to go. Typically, the bigger the event, the more confusion there's going to be, the more destruction there's going to be, the more damage. And so you need to account for that. There's going to be that period of the, oh my gosh, I can't believe it was so bad, and the quicker you can get over that and the quicker you can start recovering, the easier it's going to be for you and your family. Now, stage 6, again, in my book, is the crime increase. This is the period of time. Sometimes it happens before the event happens, but a lot of times it happens after the event is over, when all this confusion and chaos and destruction and stuff is around and there's very little law enforcement. This is when crime typically increases. Usually it's thefts or crimes of opportunity, but you have to take account that this is going to happen, especially if the power is out. There's no electricity, no lights, no alarm systems for an extended period of time. You can expect crime to increase. Now, you don't always have this everywhere after every disaster. It depends on where you are, where the disaster happens, what type of region it is in, what the people are like and stuff. So you may not have it. However, even in a safe, rural, everybody's friendly, everybody's neighborly, if it's a very long, protracted disaster, say, for example, a nationwide grid down event, at some point you're going to see crime increase for one reason or another. And finally, stage 7 is recovery and cleanup. People trying to put their lives back together as fast as possible. Often it requires help from outside of the affected area. You have the power trucks that come in from all over. You have assistance from government, federal government, or you have the Red Cross and stuff like that. And that's how people start to clean up and put their lives back together and get back to normal as possible, mainly because of all this outside help. And you need to keep in mind that the bigger the disaster, the less outside help there is, and you need to account for that. Now that we've gone through the 4 phases of emergency management and gone through what I see as the stages of a disaster, I want to talk about trigger events. And Rob in Minnesota wrote to ask, quote, "Could you please do a podcast on trigger events that would point to an impending crunch situation? There are many sources out there that tell you what you should do once your indicators occur, but very little on what those trigger events might be," end quote. Now, I wrote back to Rob and I asked him if he had a specific event in mind, and he was talking about like an economic collapse. And so some of the examples I cover will get into this. So what is a trigger event? A trigger event is an event that occurs that triggers a part of your preparedness plan. Your trigger events or your trigger points should be at the forecast stage, as I mentioned above. Most people are going to react at the emergent stage. This is when the event happens. Now, again, assuming that you had some sort of warning, like a tornado or a winter storm or a hurricane, you're going to have that forecast. A lot of time for other events like terrorist events and bombings and building collapses and fires and earthquakes and stuff, you don't have that forecast. But that doesn't mean you can't prepare and just make your trigger event the initial emergence. I know it seems fairly simple now that I said make your trigger point the forecast stage, but really that's what it is. I can't tell you what your trigger point should be because I don't know what you're preparing for. I'll go over some examples on how I do some of my trigger points, but you need to go over your preparedness plan, and you need to look at the stages of a disaster and identify the forecast or the prediction points for them, or for those that are like this, they don't have any warning, the emergence, exactly what you're going to do when. So basically that's really what it comes down to is at what point do you need to take some sort of action or enable some part of your plan. Let's take Hurricane Sandy as an example. If you live in a hurricane zone, then you should have a plan for hurricanes. This is what you're going to do in a hurricane. Now, you need to decide at what point you're going to do things for your hurricane, because you may need to top off supplies. I mean, we have everyday food that you eat. You're going to make sure you have enough of that. You're going to need to probably make sure your fuel supply is topped off, your tanks are topped off. You may have to board up your windows. Bring all your lawn chairs and furniture and stuff like that. However, you don't want to do it too soon, because then you're constantly doing this and you're never really having the hurricane hit your area, but you also don't want to do it too late. So you need to, and this is where you can look at disasters that happen when you're not affected and kind of look at, okay, from the point this happened, I have about 6 hours or 12 hours, and you can kind of look at your plan and go, okay, this is when I should probably do this, because it's getting close to a point where I need to do it. So, for example, if they say that there's a projected course for the hurricane, let's say it's 3 or 4 days out, or even a week out, and it's projected to come close to your area, if not, right on your area is where they're predicting, then you should do those things that, things like making sure that your cars are topped off, making sure that your fuel storage is topped off, making sure that you've got the plywood and the screws and all the things that you would need to actually put the next stage into place. You also want to maybe go over your plan, talk to your family. This is what we're going to maybe have to do. Then 24 hours goes by, and in the warning zone, you're still in that area of impact. Then, okay, now that we're closer, this is what we need to do. We're going to take in all the furniture, we're going to put it in the garage, we're going to go ahead and start collecting all the items that can be blown around outside, and trimming off the dead tree branches and stuff like that. Now, I have never been through a hurricane, so I can't tell you from a first-hand experience, oh, I know that you need to react at this point of time, how many hours away the hurricane might be, and do X, Y, Z. I don't have that much experience, so I can't tell you. But, if you've been through a hurricane before, or a near miss, or just use Hurricane Sandy and use it as a template for what you need to do. There's plenty of information out there. Your plan should already have it. So use those points to decide when you need to start to do things. You don't want to do everything at the very last minute, because then you're going to be one of those people standing in line at Fred's Grocery, trying to get some food, thinking, oh my gosh, I have so many other things to do. I can't afford to be standing in this line with all these other people. You want to avoid that situation. Likewise, on the other side of the coin, you don't want to be doing things so far in advance that you're wasting time. So I would put if I was doing this, I would put those things that I would want to do periodically anyways. I would want to top off my fuel storage. I would want to trim the dead branches, any trees in my yard. I would want to, clean up any sort of debris that might be blown around that I don't really want around anyways. So those sort of things that I probably should do anyways on a regular basis, I could do those, say, if I get a 7-day notice that a hurricane might be hitting my area. Okay, I'm going to do those. I'm also going to check, make sure I got plywood, make sure I got screws or nails, whatever it takes to board up my windows. That way, I've already got that stuff taken care of. And those are things that I should do anyways on a regular basis. That's how I would structure those things. Let's take another look at something a little bit simpler and not so catastrophic, and that is the cost of fuel. So, for example, right now in my area, diesel fuel is about $4 a gallon. And I know from testing my vehicle and driving it for the past 10 years, I know that I get better gas mileage the slower I go and the easier I accelerate. So if I want to be as fuel efficient as possible based on how expensive diesel fuel is, if it's $3.50, and once I've kind of acclimatized my budget to that price range, because let's be honest, $2 a gallon diesel fuel is way better than $4, but now that I've kind of acclimatized my budget to it, I'll say $3.50. At $3.50, I can go highway speed, which here in Arizona is 65 on the highways. Everybody does 70 to 75, so I don't get as good a gas mileage doing 75 as I do 65. So if I want to save money and conserve my fuel, I'm going to limit my speed to 65 miles an hour as long as the fuel is $4 or below. Once it goes above $4, that's my trigger point to say, okay, now I need to drop my highway speed to 60 miles an hour, and I need to start becoming very conscious about how fast I accelerate from a stop sign or a stoplight. Once diesel fuel hits $5 a gallon, that would be another trigger point for me to probably slow down to about 50 or 55 miles an hour on the highway and be extremely careful about how fast I push the accelerator down when accelerating from a stop, because I know that these things help with fuel economy. And then if diesel fuel goes above $5 a gallon, then I'm probably doing like 45 on the highway or looking for another avenue. And so those would be my trigger points. I'm using price as a trigger point to modify my behavior in order to achieve a certain result, this being better fuel mileage and saving a little bit of money while I drive. You could use the hurricane example as a template for winter storms and blizzards. A lot of times you're going to get 2, 3, 4 days notice that a winter storm is going to happen. As soon as you get that weather watch for a winter storm or severe winter storm or blizzard, you're going to want to start doing certain aspects of your plan, making sure you got plenty of firewood, making sure your fuel is topped off, making sure you've got whatever it is you need to do. You need to start doing that. For those events that don't have a forecast period, such as an earthquake or a EMP or a terrorist bombing or attack or something like that, your emergency plan should include an immediate action. And typically your action should be, stay safe and stay alive. But as soon as the event's over, then you need to do this. And if in a family, you're going to want to communicate, so you're going to want to enact a communication plan. You may say, okay, in an event of having to leave the city and we can't have the time to meet up at the house, here's the point where we're going to meet up at, and it's far enough away from the house that that it's probably going to be safe, and you should probably have a backup location to that as well. Again, this is part of your plan that you need to already have in place. Everybody needs to know it. And that way, when you decide, when this happens, that's your trigger, then you're going to do this. So let's take a look, basically like an economic collapse and how we can look at trigger points for that. With the possible exception of an EMP or CME event, All the disasters I've mentioned already are short-term events. They happen relatively quickly, and the recovery period typically is fairly quickly. Not always. There are still some people that were affected by Katrina that are still trying to recover. But all in all, it's generally a short period of time. There are things like an economic collapse or hyperinflation or peak oil or any sort of long-term emergency like that. It's going to be slightly different. And it would probably be a lot like the example I used of fuel cost, where I'm using price points to modify my behavior or to take certain action. Now, as I've said a couple times in the podcast already, I currently think we are in the beginning stages of mass inflation. I don't know if that's hyperinflation, but I definitely see some aspects of the economy growing in double-digit inflation. Should that be a trigger point? Probably. But it's not likely that I would take any different action than I would normally for rising prices. Maybe you would. I don't know. An event like this is definitely better curbed with plenty of preparedness before it gets to a trigger point. If you heard the interview with Vincent Cate, he was pointing out that when a government or a central bank comes out and specifically says, we're not going to do X, that should probably be a trigger point, because now you know that X is about to happen. And if you do a little research and studying on past inflationary events or hyperinflationary events, then you'll get a good idea of what X is, and you can write your plan so that if this X happens, then you're going to take this part of your plan into play, or if this X happens, then this part of your plan is going to go into play. For an economic collapse, go back and review episode 119, The Current Economy, Is It Getting Better? In it, I listed a series of questions that you can periodically ask yourself to gauge how the economy is doing. I also covered an article in depth from internationalman.com about the 11 stages of the crash. I would suggest going through those stages and keeping in mind that we're currently at stage 3, and I would go through them and set up your trigger events based on those stages. For example, in stage 4, the second wave of crashes, we're going to see a major crash in the stock market. We're going to see the currency plummet. We're going to see more bankruptcies and more unemployment. Well, that would definitely be a trigger point. You may want to implement whatever your next phase of your economic preparedness plan is going to be. Maybe it's at this point you decide to dump a lot of cash into precious metals, or you're going to make a larger food purchase, or whatever it is. And I'm not saying that those are actions you should take. I'm just saying everybody's preparedness plan is different based on their budget, based on their outlook, based on what they can do. You know, for example, you may want to start selling things now because we're already at stage 3. Sell off all the extra stuff you have, take that cash and hold it as an emergency supply. And if we get to stage 4, or when we get to stage 4, you may say, okay, well, I'm going to convert that cash into either tangible goods, food, maybe precious metals, whatever it is. I mean, again, it's your plan, and you need to be able to, work your plan. Now, for example, in stage 7, it's called Economy Reacts in Lockstep to Government Actions. And what is expected in a stage 7 is hyperinflation, which is a dramatic increase in food and fuel costs, massive unemployment, extensive foreclosures and bankruptcies. Well, this might be your trigger point, or at this point you can maybe assume that your job is going to go away and you're going to be unemployed. That might be your trigger point, is unemployment plus stage 7 or stage 6 or stage 8, whatever you want to do it. That combination of events is your trigger point to uproot yourself out of the city and move to a more rural area where you can set up more of a homestead sort of existence. So if your plan has that, then that could be your trigger point. As you can see, it's not very easy for me to tell you what your trigger point should be, because I don't know what your preparedness plan is. But your preparedness plan, which is your plan of action for disasters and emergencies, you look at what those events are and establish what the forecast point is, the stage for forecasting or prediction, or at a certain point along that event timeline, like in an economic collapse, that you're going to do this, or you're going to enact this portion of your plan. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up stages of disaster and trigger points. I hope that has helped make it a little bit more clear of how you can go about establishing what your trigger point should be. I do still hope to have the spouse show up soon. My wife and I have been working on it. We've been trying to get to a point where we can record it. The issue is that, we have 3 kids and we have a lot of school projects and stuff, and finding a time where her and I can both sit down and be uninterrupted is something that we're having a little bit of an issue with. So I didn't want you to think that we're not going to do it. It's just taking a little more time than we thought. Well, folks, thanks for downloading and listening to the podcast. You can reach me through the website at thepreparednesspodcast.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/preparednesspodcast, on Twitter as Prepcast, and of course, you can always email me directly at rob@prepcast.info. Thanks for listening, and until next time, enjoy life and be safe.